Hello, everybody. My name is Cameron Crowe. I'm one of the founders of Ponga. I'm going to be your host and moderator today. And I'm joined by Ponga co-founder Barbara Tien and our special guest. Thank you all for coming and welcome to the Meet Ponga webinar series, the photo storytelling with Rhonda Lauritzen. Before we get started, I'd like to do a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session is going to be recorded and will be available to you after the session. All of the attendees are currently on mute. If you're not familiar with using Zoom, although I can't imagine anybody in the post-COVID world that isn't, the communication controls are located at the bottom panel of your screen. As we've just now discovered, chat may be disabled or not working for this program. So please put all your questions into the Q&A and we'll get to as many of them as we can. And we'll also add content and resource tips for you into that Q&A sessions or that Q&A function, since the chat capability is not working. Before I introduce our speaker, I know many of you are new to Ponga. So first, let's get started with a little background. In today's world, we need to better understand family history now more than ever. Between the pandemic, losing loved ones, the increasing distance between families and generations, the demands of everyday life, we need to focus on rediscovering and sharing those histories that define who we are and where we come from. We developed Ponga to be a digital storytelling service that was born out of the realization that we're perhaps a generation or two from losing awareness and appreciation for the stories and legacies that shaped us, our values, and who we are as individuals. The service is made up of several elements to support this goal. Firstly, the platform enables your efforts across 3 domains. Firstly, to be able to quickly and easily arrange and organize your photos using our unique facial recognition technology. Second, curate and tell the stories within those photos, either in written form, verbal form, using any number of resources, multimedia elements, additional resources like maps, locations, etc. And then thirdly, to share those photos, put them back into circulation so you can collaborate and share with friends and family, and they can enjoy the content, and you can crowdsource stories from others, all in a completely secure and private way. Our service also includes support for all your ongoing efforts. Onboarding services like one-on-ones and group events, user support if you get stuck or have a question, FAQs to answer common questions, and we also provide you with a thriving community, subject matter experts with webinars and content like you're getting today, how-tos, success stories, blogs, and unique use cases, as well as master classes and jumpstart programs. We developed Ponga to capture these important memories and stories, and we wanted to take the worry and difficulty out of organizing your photos and storytelling to make it fun, quick, and easy. Simply, we help you bring your photos to life through the stories that are locked within them. Okay, that ends the commercial. We're not going to subject you to a demo of Ponga today. But if you would like, please go to ponga.com/learn-more. Barbara will put that link into the window, and you can look at a short 3.5-minute demo to understand better how it works and how it can simplify your storytelling and photo organization efforts. In addition, if you'd like, we can either set you up with a one-on-one session, or please watch for emails for future demos. So thank you. Okay, let's get started. First, an introduction. Rhonda Lauritzen is the founder and CEO of Evalogue Life. She's a professional speaker, teacher, coach, and biographer with multiple published books. As an author, she specializes in writing life stories, collecting oral histories, and historical storytelling. Before founding Evalogue Life, she served as a college vice president and the CEO. In 2007, writing her family history began with the story of her parents, which became, in fact, her first book, Every Essential Element. Most recently, she was the writing coach to Rob Gentile, author of the #1 bestseller, Quarks of Light, a near-death experience. She believes that when you tell a story, it changes the ending. We're fortunate to have her here today to share her experiences, best practice, tips and tricks to help support and accelerate your photo curation and storytelling efforts. Hopefully by the end of the session today, you'll get techniques you can use to capture the histories of your loved ones, receive a framework that you can use right now to tell your stories, a free oral history course where Rhonda takes you through a storytelling process and acts as your guide to apply the concepts she's going to discuss today, as well as special Ponga pricing and packaging. Rhonda, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's kick off with Why are oral histories important, and why do we need to capture them, and why are these stories so critical to us as family units?
It's such a great question. I'm passionate about all stories, and there's more than one way to capture a story or tell a story, but oral history is especially powerful. When you hear somebody's voice again in a recorded way, years from now, it's like they are right back in the room. There's just something so intimate about a person's voice. I'm telling a story. There are a few things that I like to use to describe a person: their hands, their eyes, and their voice. And I'm debating how much to go into a story here, but I became passionate about voices with my own parents. I recorded my dad when I was 19 years old. I showed up on my parents' doorstep, surprised them one weekend I was away, and I brought with me my boombox. And that dates me, right? But I had my dad sing, and I ended up taking that cassette tape and tucking away the original for years because I didn't want it to degrade, until I got to the place where I could digitize it. And I took that out, and it's just the clarity of my dad singing is one of the most amazing gifts. And how did I have the wherewithal to do that when I was 19 years old? I couldn't have known then that decades later I would have a daughter who would never get to meet him, and she knows him through his voice.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful stuff. The ability to, I think, connect with a loved one, friends, family, ancestors, whoever it happens to be, through listening to that voice provides a degree of intimate connection that you can't get just from reading the written word. And that's very powerful stuff. How did you, it's funny, I tell a story myself about, and wrote this in a blog when we introduced Ponga, about my son never getting a relationship with his grandfather. And I'd love for him to be able to go click on a picture and of my dad in his Army uniform and have him tell my son in his own voice what it was like to be a paratrooper during the Korean War. And I missed that chance because there was nothing like Ponga available at that point in time. How do you, there's this old aphorism, right, about, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago and the next best time is, today. How do you get started doing this? How do you pick the forum and the topic and the photo or the artifact, or where do you begin the journey? Because this is a pretty complicated thing. And I think a lot of people look at this and think, oh my God, this is such a challenge. How do I get organized for it? How do I get ready? How do I, architect a script? And before you know it, the whole mental task becomes so complex that it never gets started.
I'm so glad you asked that, because this word, like complicated and feeling the need to do a family history and the burden, it takes it from being this like joyful thing, which it should be, to this feeling of burden and guilt and, oh, I should be. And I think people have this vision that they need to write a whole book or make it complicated. And that's exactly why I like to start with oral history. I basically tell all my students, start here. Whether you're working on your own story, interview yourself, or if you're working on family histories, start by interviewing the people who have memories, because oral history is not complicated. Mm-hmm. And I know people feel intimidated by it. Like, it's, even the word oral history sounds super academic. And there are, academics that do it, but in our own families, it needn't be complicated. So where I would start today for everybody, I'll give you the challenge right now. Think of somebody whose voice you would want to hear in the future. One person right now. And when we get off this call, give them a call. Like, send them a text, send them an email and say, I would love to sit down with you. Could we find a time? And just schedule it, right? Once you've done that, then you'll have a deadline, and then you'll sort of be, okay, now what do I do? And you'll figure it out from now until then. And we're going to give you tools and tell you how. But honestly, it's not that hard. And once you've done it, you will go, that was amazing. It was enjoyable. They loved it. I loved it. Maybe I was nervous, but it worked out. And I'm so glad I did. If you do that one thing, I promise you, this is a promise I can tell you, I know you will treasure it one day.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, a lot of times I have my own 90-year-old mother is um, um, an unbelievable repository of stories. And the problem is she doesn't always like to be recorded. She gets very self-conscious. We have to almost like sneak up on her and do it. And one of the things that we've been doing in my family, and this is actually one of the main premises behind Ponga, is this idea of using a photo that's almost like a mnemonic for them. And they can use the imagery in the photo to talk about the circumstances or the chronology or the people that are there. I had just as an example, I had a scenario last New Year's where my 90-year-old mother and my 17-year-old son had a phenomenal hour-long discussion over a single image about her dragging pots and pans in 1940 to the movie theater to get free tickets during the war medal drives. And my son was fascinated by the whole concept. They very rarely talk because bridging a 17-year-old and 90-year-old, intergenerational gap is a very tough thing. But we were so rapt that this image and the stories that came out of it held both of their attention for well over an hour and created this intergenerational connection that my son now likes to talk to her on the phone and ask her all these cool questions about this and that and the other thing. And so it's really become an incredible kind of connective tissue between them.
That's brilliant, Cameron. I love that by doing that, it opened the door to a stronger relationship. And I think that's one of the things also that I love so much about oral history is that it's not only about the preservation of stories for the future, it's about what it does. There's something so powerful about the person telling the story and the person receiving and listening. There's a bond formed there. And I like to say in the end of the course we'll talk about later, I think listening is sacred ground. There's something very powerful about that connection. And so to go back to the idea that you used a photo as, that's a great word, mnemonic, to spark memory, but it's also brilliant in that it takes the focus off of anybody's self-consciousness. You open up a photo album and they're looking at the photos, they're thinking about memories, they will completely forget that there's a recorder on the table. And it will just flow from there and be completely natural. And all the sort of tension and nervousness that anybody would have will just drain away.
Right. Talk a little bit about as long as we're on this topic about recording the histories, we talk about, getting people to, use either digitized or analog photos as this kind of platform on which all of these stories are built, right? And a single photo can be such a multi-layered fabric that has photos that can be, discussed across a wide variety of topic areas. How do you get to the point where you're kind of curating this to get these representative moments and help focus the story on something that people that are going to listen to it later are going to be interested with, rather than this long history that might be, 10 pages of written, activity or transcribed notes from an oral history?
Well, again, what's brilliant about using the photo as the kicking off point is that a photo is a moment. And when we talk to people about telling stories, and this is again how to take the whole process from being complicated and overwhelming to doable. And that is even a life story. If you're going to write your entire life story and do an autobiography, you still want to tell it in moments and write individual little vignettes about each thing that happened. And you want to get specific. You want to tell a story about a specific day when something happened. And by definition, a photo is a moment. And so when you use that as basically your question prompt, you're capturing that moment. And then I was just thinking, it's funny, we've talked so many times about this. It's never occurred to me the sort of brilliance of bringing together a visual, an audible, and a story. It's like covering all the bases of what
Right.
makes for something a really rich experience. And I guess you guys know that. I mean, that's the whole
Right.
point of Ponga. So it's funny. I'm slow on the uptake here, I guess.
No, but I appreciate that observation for the audience, because you really are describing exactly one of the fundamental premises that we develop Ponga for across these three very rich areas of functionality. There's lots of places out there that you can, repository your photos, and there's a lot of places there that you can share them, but there's not very, very many places that you can go to repository your photos, whether you have one photo or 100,000, and then choose them, select any image in that photo, and use that as the basis upon which you tell a story. And then be able to take that story and share it privately with your friends and family, or collaborate and crowdsource other stories. I know this is probably true for a lot of people, is that we have so many photos, and I very rarely know everybody or everything that's in the photo, and I need to get it out there so I can get my sisters or cousins or aunts and uncles to say, hey, who's the guy third from the left, or what is that thing that my niece is holding, or whatever it happens to be, because I don't know those details. And even when you're at an event with somebody, whether it's a wedding or something like that, very frequently, if you and I are at a wedding together, we'll come back at it a month later, and your stories and my stories will be different enough that we may not have been at the same event, right? So those recollections, I think, are powerful. And I think it's also interesting what you're talking about as it relates to keep those representative moments in recollection to be kind of short and anecdotal, maybe slightly humorous in nature, so that the reading audience is excited to essentially consume them.
Yes. So the two things you've talked about, one is just the importance of using photo and oral history to just capture the details, get the names and dates. And when you're interviewing a loved one around photos, it's this opportunity to capture the history of a family, the family history. It's so easy to do it through a conversation and with a photo album in front of you. So that's one part. But then the other part, again, is the storytelling and the moment. And you used the word curate earlier, and it's also one of my favorite words in terms of storytelling. I don't know how you think of curating, but I'll give you sort of my definition and how I teach this to students. When you think about like where to start and which stories to tell and which ones to include and not include, I like to say you're like a museum curator, right? So you have the museum, if it's a big museum, might have thousands or maybe even millions of objects in the basement or wherever the archives are. And the museum curator's job is to pull those things that are going to be the most interesting and that are representative of everything else. And if you do your job well, one story about a person is enough. I mean, we want to do more, of course, but think about it. Everyone in the history of humanity, how much do we have on them? Almost nothing. But if you have one story about an ancestor, a good story, that person comes to life.
Right.
And so it doesn't have to be, I have to sit down and write a giant, family history that's this thick. You can write one page and honor someone and bring them to life in a way that they'll be remembered for future generations. It doesn't have to be more complicated.
That's a really good point. I think, we can support in our service the ability, if people are doing family histories that are in fact the, thick, hey, I want to do a book on my mom or her background or her ancestors, whatever. Yeah, you can do that. But I think the majority of our members and the people we interact with a lot are really looking at doing exactly what you're talking about, is that how do I, I've got a large library of photos, for instance, how do I call out those most meaningful images and capture the stories that are associated with those most meaningful imagery that is interestingly enough and representative enough that I can do it in short form, which makes it so much more consumable when you're inviting other people to your Ponga albums and allowing them to look at the curations that you've made. I mean, and I think it also is important because I think a lot of people think about these projects and they don't realize that don't, you told me something the other day, don't try and be an expert. Don't try and be perfect. Don't try and make it a gigantic project, and don't get intimidated. Get started, do it briefly, and just get it out there. And it will have a tendency to snowball. I don't know what other people's family are like, but when we sit down with photos in my family, some person will typically, and I have a pretty large extended family, we'll get together and one person will tell, just like you're talking, one short little anecdote, and then somebody else will chime in with another little short anecdote that they've recalled or is associated with a similar photo. And the next thing you do, you have this collection of very short, highly readable, really humorous, lots of really colorful and representative moments that you were talking about.
Yes. And so in addition to not being intimidated and not overcomplicating it, I think one of the keys also is to not over plan and think that you need to go in and have and it's great to have some question prompts. And especially if some people are less comfortable talking, again, that's why photos are great, because it sort of gives you natural question prompts, but allow in an interview for the serendipity to happen, because you don't know where it's going to go. And you don't know the things that they'll tell you that are completely spontaneous and kind of magic. And so go in with a bit of a plan, but when the plan doesn't happen, just go with it and enjoy it, and just be present enough to accept the gift of whatever comes out.
Yeah. Can you develop that a little bit more for the attendees relative to the preparation or the way to think about how you go into these things? Certainly some of them can be serendipitous, right? We have a photo and we say, gosh, Mom, who's the guy standing next to you? But there may be things where you're looking for specific information. How should we think about that in terms of what level of preparation should we have? And, do we need special equipment, or do we, what's the right way to kind of kick off this without making it sound like I need to spend hours and hours in preparation? How should I think about it?
Yeah, a little preparation goes a long way. Even to be one of the things I love to teach is be prepared so that you can be spontaneous in those moments. When you were talking about getting together with your extended family and they start storytelling, it's one of the most wonderful opportunities to just pull out your recorder and put it on the table at dinner. And is it okay, guys, if I record this? This is some great stuff, because you'll never remember those stories later. But if you're prepared in advance with a recording method, you can do that spontaneously. So a couple things that you want to do to be prepared in advance. You do need a recording method. And this is another piece of homework that I would assign to everybody is, do you have a recording device on your phone? Make sure you have an app on your phone and that you know how to use it, because it'll be with you all the time, right? You probably don't go many places where you don't have your phone with you. So you can just pull that out at a moment's notice and start recording if you've done the prep in advance. Right. And if you know how to use it. I also like to have a digital recorder because the audio quality is great. So for a more formal interview, I like to have a digital recorder. I like to have a lav mic, a lavalier mic, or a lapel mic, just so that you get the best, richest quality audio. But on the other hand, I'll take crummy audio and spontaneous stories over perfection, right? So it depends on the environment. You want to know how to get your audio files from your device to where you're going to use it. So can you get it from your phone into the cloud or onto your computer? It's another reason I like digital recorders is you can just plug them with a USB straight into your computer. Right. So a few things like that.
That's great. That's good advice. I mean, I think everybody should be aware that, whether you use a professional recording device or, just the ability to take a voice note on your iPhone or your Android device, those are equally capable of getting the job done, number one. And second, all of those files use industry standard capabilities that you can upload directly into Ponga and associate with a photograph or a historical element that you're using as an artifact. Additionally, in Ponga, we do have the ability to record straight into a photograph from your laptop. And so you can use the microphone on your laptop. It's just as effective to get the job done that Rhonda's describing. It's probably a little bit less intrusive to use your phone, and it's just as easy to upload those recordings. And boy, it's a very quick way to get Uncle Bob off the price of gas and politics and everything else at Thanksgiving dinner and talk more about, hey, tell us the story again about, what it was like to do X, Y, and Z. So I think that's a really good advice. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned. Go ahead,
If I may
Barbara.
interrupt here with the nerd points that I'm doing. First, I'm just, it's sort of like live tweeting here, capturing moments as I'm impressed, and I hope they're useful to everybody in the audience. And as you're talking about this, it occurs to me that kind of a hands-on guide for how to deal with sound files from your phone to the device, formats, and all those kinds of noisy things. I think a hands-on guide would be useful for people who are interested in all of this, and we'll see if we can't make that available to you as well.
Yeah. Since Rhonda, since we're talking about, a lot of cases, I think it's fun to get family stories at large. I think it's fun, like in my case, to get things from my 90-year-old mother, whose cognitive skills are degrading every day. And so I'm, we're in a rush to get as many of those things. There's also some things that are difficult. And I know that you have a great specialty around the idea of how to engage elders on sensitive topics, difficult topics, things that you really want to know because they're important, and they're important maybe to a family legacy. It could have to do with a death or some other tragedy, or it could have to do with a painful memory or things like that. Those are things that we want to maintain in the family, but not everybody wants to talk about them. It could be participation in a war. Can you talk a little bit about how the best way to engage our family members or our friends in those kind of discussions?
Yeah, it's an important question, and it's one that there isn't always an easy answer for. And I just want to say, to begin with, you may encounter unexpected resistance from those that you want to interview. And it's a question that I get a lot. People will say, I want to interview my dad or my grandma or someone, and they're not interested in doing it. And they're sort of heartbroken because they just are unwilling. And so a couple of thoughts around that. One is sometimes people just need a little bit of coaxing. It's a good idea if you can find out the reason why they're unwilling. Some people don't want to do it because they don't think they have anything interesting to say. They don't think their life actually is interesting. And just to reassure them that everyone has an interesting story. And I personally believe that the farmer's life should be celebrated much more than the celebrities today. They have more wisdom and, value. So first of all, reassure them that it doesn't even matter what they say. You're just interested in their voice and their personality. And so don't even worry about what comes out. But then if they're hesitant because of a sensitive subject or because of trauma, you're going to have to tread more lightly. And it's a good idea before going in to an interview to ask, are there any off limits topics? Is there anything you really don't want to talk about? And to be respectful. And unfortunately, maybe unfortunately is the wrong word. It's just, I'll use the example of trauma survivors, especially in the Holocaust and some of World War II. There's what's called the code of silence, where generations just have an understanding that we don't talk about it, right, and we don't go there. And sometimes the code of silence goes to the grave with people. And it's heartbreaking because unburdening can be so incredibly therapeutic and bonding. And so if you can help get the idea across that you will not judge, and anything they want to talk about or don't want to talk about, it's all okay. You can go there or not, and just reassure them that you're going to be respectful. And then if you can get them even to do an interview about light topics, say, I promise we won't go there. Yeah. You might be surprised that over time they might open up. And one day where they weren't willing the next day, maybe they will be. I had a friend, she is a friend, and she was also a student, worked on her dad for years to be willing to interview him. He's like, nope, not going to do it. Not interested.
Yeah.
And then one day he was. So don't give up, and don't take it personally if they aren't ready or willing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's an awkward thing. We really want to get those elders' recollections. And I myself was surprised by the always untimely, but very speedy loss of my father, which was completely unexpected. And so, I'm now kind of highly sensitized to the idea of, gosh, I might even take a risk of insulting somebody for the timeliness of getting it done, and because if you miss it, you miss it. And occasionally, I'm sure that everybody on this call has had this experience, when somebody's gone, you're going through their papers and artifacts and events, and all of a sudden you discover all of these interesting things that may have to do with, fathers and sons and mothers and daughters and siblings, and everybody in that context doesn't always tell everything about their lives to one another. And sometimes you find things out that are incredibly colorful later on that you would have loved to have known, and that might have actually even strengthened the bond. But for whatever reason, it went untold, and you discover it afterwards, and now you don't have anybody to ask. And so I think that goes back to the, like anything, communications and expectation setting is everything. So you talk to your subject about what you want to know and respond accordingly.
Yeah. And maybe you could try some tricks too. Maybe someone doesn't want to talk about their life, but maybe they'd be willing to sing a song from their childhood, or just do something just so you can capture a little snippet of their voice,
Yeah.
Get what you can. And you're right, do it now, because I know you do, I do. I can't tell you how many students and readers have said, I didn't realize how little time I had.
Mm.
Yeah.
And either they were so glad they did, or so regretful that they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you come across any, I was talking earlier about ways of, one of the things that was, originally when we created Ponga, it was mostly around this idea of using photos that we have both digitally and analog as a way of creating this foundation for storytelling. And a lot of our members use it for, taking the tubs of photos that they have, organizing them, and then being able to cull out the 1 or 2 or 3 or 4,000 of them down to the 50 or so that make sense. And they use that, as I said before, as a platform to engage an elder. One of the things that we're discovering as we talk to some of our members is that this storytelling capability really becomes like that story I told earlier about my son and my mother, a way of bridging this generational divide and getting young people and, their elders much more closely associated. We don't do that very well as a culture, number one. And two, in the United States, we're particularly bad about it. And do you have some experiences or examples about ways to make that more effective and make that more of, how do I want to describe it, a process and a structure, like maybe introducing a young person into that interviewing process, for instance?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think sometimes just asking a young person and a grandparent if they would be willing to engage together. We often find that's a trick, by the way, a trick of the trade. If someone's not willing to talk, if you put a grandchild up to it, a lot of grandparents will do anything for their grandkids if they're just asked. And it's so fascinating to see the kinds of questions that young people will ask that are very different than the kinds of questions that I would ask. And like a Rachel Trotter that I work with, she has had her children interview grandparents, and they ask just the most interesting questions, like, describe what life was like when you were my age. And the bond that's created through that process is just fabulous. So if you can facilitate by helping the young person in your life, get the tools, and although they may have more than, they may be just off and running without needing your coaching, but just give them the idea and the impetus to get together and do it, the result can be fabulous. And I'm so glad you brought up youth as well, because we so often talk about capturing the voices of the elders in our lives. Don't forget about the young people. Interview the young people or just get their voices recorded, because the little voices will be gone just as fast as the old people's voices.
Yeah.
And they will change, and you will cherish the little voices.
Yeah, Barbara knows this. I've told her this before, but my 17-year-old, I have about a decade or so of phone messages he's left me on my phone that I keep, that I've got to get off soon and put on my into my laptop, because he went from having this clear, crisp as a bell choir boy voice, and then just one day after, he turned into Barry White. And he's got this deep voice now. He's a little whip of a thing, but he has a baritone voice, and I miss that little choir boy sound. And I wish that, I do have a couple of these that I'm going to be putting into his pictures on my Ponga account, and it's been really great to actually listen to them in that context. But your other point is also well taken, because I witness all the time that youth of any type tend to get away with all kinds of questions, because they're just typically innocent and genuine and authentic, and can ask somebody who might have lost a leg in the war, kind of, what happened to you? And that person will explain in excruciating detail in a way that they can consume it and understand it. Whereas another adult asking that question probably wouldn't even think about asking the question in the first place. But the second, it might be met with a little bit of resistance and sensitivity.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah.
And this is another thought, and it looked like Barbara maybe had something to say. But just another example of getting the voices and the photos married up. I had my daughter, when she was 4, narrate our vacation. And I had her do it in a video platform. This is before I knew about Ponga. But to have her voice, she chose the photos from the vacation. So she was the one who curated it. And it's funny that she picked different pictures than I would have chosen. And then her explaining each one, absolutely priceless. It's so cute.
Yeah, that's really great. As a matter of fact, we have a couple of interesting scenarios where, there's always been this kind of scrapbooking kind of a craft activity for a lot of people that are curating a lot of these things into memorabilia that they have. And they're hard to distribute because they're hard copy and things like that. We have several members that have put digital scrapbooks together on Ponga and done kind of the same thing that your daughter's doing. She, voiceover and narrating over the stories that are in each page of the documentation, whether it's a trip with some photographs and maybe some anecdotes about, what you did in terms of roadside attractions or what happened on the trip at the lake or what have you. It's a really great place to capture all of that, and you can do it in one place. So to me, that's a lot of the value that we bring to this discussion.
So easy. Just, the photo is there, hit record, and just done. It's amazing.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to add to that is you talk about jumping generations in both directions and capturing the quality of those voices. So often, particularly in North America, we have a lot of international families which have generations across oceans, across language, across generational barriers. And being able to have an environment where they can connect and share their stories, where maybe Google Translate inserts right there to go ahead and translate what the grandchild said, or you're capturing that language right there audibly. It becomes something that different parts of the family want to get involved in. In my own family, we have a transnational family. And it has been a great joy to cross 3-4 generations and have kids uncomfortable with their Chinese stepping in to be able to say something and hear back and just engage at that level. And it's so incredibly meaningful and something that will be treasured for generations.
language and accents are so important to culture. And when you're a generation removed, if everyone immigrates to another country, the language and the accents of the mother country are lost. And there's something really tragic if that's lost.
That accent's a great point, because we take languages like Spanish or Chinese, where you have such tremendous regionalisms around the world, and a child may go and study that language in school, but hearing the voices of their grandparents, the language and accents carries that culture with it. It's really a great point.
Even in the United States, as homogenous as the language and the accent has become, the regional differences still are fabulous. And especially generationally, you know, my dad with his it was a very unique accent here in Utah in his generation, and very colorful language and slang that I could never have made it up. Never.
Yeah. You know, I that's a particularly interesting point for me. I describe myself periodically as the northern child of southern parents, and all of my summers were spent on farms and in the country in Tennessee and Kentucky and all the way down through Texas and Louisiana. And we used to get multiple generations of people together, and you know, it was over the really hot, sweltering summers when you'd have all these generations together, and you'd be out on the picnic benches, you know, eating outside and hearing these stories from sometimes great grandparents at the time. And you'd have, like I say, multiple generations of Tennesseans speaking. And it was just, it is almost a special thing to listen to these stories and hear all the different accents and hear all the different regionalisms and everything else. It was really part of the whole color of telling the story. And to capture that is such a, it's such a privilege, because, all of those stories now are lost. Most of those people in my world are gone. Nobody ever wrote that stuff down, because you, as a young person or as a teenager, even up in the 20s and 30s, nobody's thinking about their mortality. Nobody's writing this stuff down. You either hope to remember it and somebody can retell it later, or it's just lost forever.
The way I think I'm so glad Tennessee, like some of my favorite storytellers of all time are like Tennesseans. I don't know what it is about that accent and the storytelling in the DNA. It is so rich and fabulous, but I think it's becoming more homogenized with each generation. If you don't capture it, it's gone.
Yep. We're going to lose it if we're not careful. I want to pause here for just a quick second and see if we have any questions from anybody that they'd like to kind of get in front of Rhonda or Barbara and myself, and just kind of give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you'd like addressed, either about your personal projects that you're trying to accomplish, or things that you'd like to know more about Ponga. So with that, I'll kind of let anybody post their questions in the Q&A. I hope the tabs for Q&A are working, if the chat is not. And what I also want to do is, as we're kind of nearing the top of the hour, is talk a little bit about, Rhonda, some of the projects that you work on at Evalogue Life, and tell us a little bit about, your organization and what you do professionally.
Great. Yes. So we have a small team here of professionals. We're located in Utah, and we're both doing the work. We are, all of us, Rachel Trotter and I, and all the members of our team, are doing projects for clients and our own families, and we're teaching at the same time. And so, we have oral history services. We do professional oral history interviewing for clients. We do writing projects, but teaching is such a passion for us, because it's expensive to hire somebody to do it for you. And there's something important about engaging yourself. So I know at the end, we'll be talking about a class that we're making available to your people.
That's right.
And I can't wait for them to see it. So
yeah, that's great, Rhonda. Thanks for that overview. Dan asked a question about collaborating with FamilySearch.org. And I can tell you that for all of you that are kind of familiar with the conference Roots Tech, that is partially sponsored by Family Search. We have participated in that event in the past. The Family Search people have reached out on multiple occasions to work with us. We're actually open to doing work with them to the point where we've actually thought about integrating some of their family tree and search capabilities with our ability to curate, repository, and communicate and share the stories that are associated with those people on the family tree. So the only thing I can tell you, Dan, is to stay tuned because we do have product roadmaps that we're thinking about in that regard, and we do kind of speak with those folks on a regular basis. So I can tell you that we expect in the future to be delivering some additional capabilities that will be integrated with other services that may be Family Search or Ancestry.com or Heritage or some of those other capabilities there, MyHeritage, that you're probably familiar with.
I'll also add as a technical aside right now, if you have any page anywhere on the web, including that profile of your great-grandfather that happens to be on Family Search, you can copy that link and paste that link into any selection in any Ponga picture. It won't embed because that page is behind a paywall, it's behind an authentication wall, but you can paste that link in so that anybody viewing your picture can go there. They just have to log in themselves. So that works right now and would work for any kind of piece. Cameron's answer about the longer term is something that, we think about that kind of stuff too, because do have that great grandfather's page on Family Search.
Right. Yeah, and Jim, we appreciated your comment about noticing that we do trade a little bit of the family stories here, because frankly, that's what gives this process meaning, and that's what gives it color, and that's what makes it, intensely personal for the members that we serve. I mean, that's really what we're all about, is to find a forum for us to share these things. And very frequently what happens is different ways of doing things provide a new level of a tip or a technique or a trick or a best practice that we can adopt ourselves and take forward. I mean, Rhonda is an expert here, and she provides a lot of very interesting best practices about how to go through these capabilities within the content and courseware that she delivers. And generally speaking, those are to be guides, and you ultimately will wind up customizing these capabilities based on the tools and services and techniques you have available to you, as well as your own personal style about how you ask questions. You may be more formal, you may be, like myself, a lot less formal, and you use these personal stories as a way of really understanding the best way to do this. And what we're trying to do is provide you with in today's world, a technology-enabled capability to do it more effectively, to do it more quickly, and to be able to share and distribute those stories among your family and friends. So
a funny thing too is the way we communicate today is very different than how we did 20 years ago. I don't know about you, or maybe I'm the nerd, but every time I have a conversation with someone, it usually ends up with a link, which is why we have the chat going here, because we speak in links. And being able to reference what we're talking about so someone can go down and explore in further detail is just a natural part of the way we communicate. So this is kind of where we're headed.
Yeah. The Heather asked a question about how do the memberships work, and essentially it's a subscription membership. We take privacy and security very seriously, and so we made an early decision not to trade in our members' data to sell advertising to support the company. So we decided that we would charge a monthly or annual subscription memberships. And yes, Heather, you can invite others to access for free. So it doesn't matter whether you're inviting 1 or 1,000 people to your albums. It's all free. It's all covered under your subscription. And by the way, it's important to understand, to know that you control not only who accesses this material, but also you control what role they can play. Can they just view it? Can they edit it? Can they add commentary, etc.? And you will identify who's a collaborator or contributor or a viewer or an observer as you see fit. Okay.
I want to comment also about Jim's comment when he said, I just noticed that the three of you are making meaning by trading in stories. I think that language is so important and insightful. Jim, you probably are aware. I'm just guessing you're aware of the idea that we make meaning in our lives through the stories that we tell. And we're doing it all the time. We're telling a story about what's happening around us all the time. There's the running commentary. But as we go back and we curate the stories, we're making meaning for our families about what our values are, what's important to us. The stories that we choose to curate are making the meaning for our families. And yes, we were doing that here too. So I just wanted to give a shout out to that language.
Yeah, great. Hey, Rhonda, Heather's asking about or Karen, sorry, about your one pager around school kids interacting with elders. And have you tried approaching maybe school districts or educational institutions about this?
We've done a little bit, not with elementary school, but we did some really fun projects right before the pandemic. We actually got a grant through the local school district. Let's see, it was funded by the Arts Council, the school district, and the Boys and Girls Club. And we actually taught some storytelling classes through the Boys and Girls Club and also through the high school. And it was fabulous. Yeah. We taught story structure, we taught interviewing, and in the high school class, it was fun because they wrote a personal story, which then became an essay for a college admission application. But we taught them about the power of story and had them interview someone as part of the process. So that's something that's on our radar to do more of. It kind of, a hold got put on it when the pandemic happened, and so we haven't got back to it yet, but there's some powerful work to be done there. I'm not sure what we're going to do in the future, but something.
That's great. Yeah, maybe that'll be something that we collaborate on going forward. Wouldn't that be fun? So everybody, this has been an amazing session today. We really appreciate all of your attention. It's been really high value content for anybody wishing to capture those important moments. And we enjoyed sharing Ponga with you and want to thank Rhonda Lauritzen for lending her expertise and experience today. Again, you can learn more about her books, courses, and resources at Evalogue.life. Please make a point to check out our website. And lastly, thanks everyone for coming and spending the entire hour and some with us. We appreciate your attention and participation, and we look forward to welcoming you as members. So please check out our website at ponga.com and subscribe today. We will also be following up with the emails that Barbara talked to you about. And pay attention to those as it goes forward, because we'll also be setting up some opportunities to do demo only sessions so that we'll give you a full detailed step-by-step walkthrough of everything from how to upload a photo to how to tell the story using Rhonda's techniques, and then how to share and collaborate with your friends and family. So with that, thank you very much. Everybody have a great rest of their Monday evening, and thank you for attending.